Hi everyone. I'm sad that I can't visit you in person today, but I wanted to be able to talk through some resume and cover letter kind of quick tips and how-tos. So today, just some general overall things we're going to talk about are resume basics, and we're going to talk about formatting strategies. It's a really common question that comes up, so I'll talk a little bit about how to structure, what to put on a resume, and then we will look at some sample resumes, and then very briefly we'll touch on cover letters. And the reason my cover letters are brief is because it really is, there's a structure piece to it. And then the rest of it is, it should be a customized story you're telling to an employer. So we'll talk about all of these different pieces today. If this presentation brings up any questions for you, please feel free to reach out. I included my contact information on the front slide, so just grab that and you're welcome to send me an email. I'm happy to work with resumes via email, or you can set up an appointment to come in virtually via handshake. So some overall resume basics. Resume should tell your story. So the number one reason why you're coming in for an interview is because an employer thinks you're qualified on paper and wants to know that you are a good fit for the organization. They want to know you. So your resume should reflect you as a person, what interests you, what skills you want to use, what aspects you're passionate about. So I often talk with my students, my clients, that when you are putting anything on a resume, the measuring stick you should use, not, I hear a lot of students will be like, I left that out because that wasn't relevant. And well, we don't know what's relevant. And you can get you can do some research, you can look at the job description, you can use your network to get a sense of what is relevant. But your resume should reflect, because we don't know what is relevant or not, it should reflect you. So my measuring stick I always recommend is it something that brought you joy? Was it a meaningful experience to you? Was it something you learned from? So I think about, like, maybe you were the captain of your high school golf team, and that's where all of your closest friends from high school came from. You really loved it. You got to lead practices. You were acknowledged by your teammates. You were voted in as captain by your teammates because of your hard work and your work ethic. That could be relevant to an employer, even if you're looking for a job as an aerospace engineer, because you're going to bring that person, that work ethic, that leadership style, the person who resonated with their teammates. You're going to bring that person to the workplace. So to tell your story, it should also explain the why. So even if I'm saying, you could put things on there that we don't know, that you might not think are super relevant, like I've had a student put their cliff diver on their resume and that got them the interview at the company that gave them their first job. So it doesn't always have to feel relevant, but it should always explain the why. Why is that important enough to take up space on your resume? So talk about that. Talk about why you were elected captain of your golf team. Talk about why you were a cliff diver and what went into that. So this is more than like responsibilities included. It is actually talking about what that value add, what you brought to an organization, what you gained out of it, your applied learning. Your formatting really needs to be applicant tracking system friendly. So I typically recommend avoid text boxes, avoid formatting through, like, Word has a lot of templates that use a lot of text boxes and structures that applicant tracking systems can't read. So most companies that are over a certain size, so most large companies, employ an applicant tracking system to scan your resume. Career Services is in the process of bringing an AI, like an applicant tracking system, onto campus. It's called the VMOC. It should be launching hopefully by the start of next semester. We're in the process of, we've got to teach the AI first, so that's what we're doing right now. So be on the lookout for that. But a good resource that is out there in the public that you can access is something called jobscan.co. So jobscan.co is free for a certain amount of uses, and it runs your resume through an applicant tracking system. So an ATS essentially is an algorithm that scans your resume looking for keywords. So it really needs to be applicant tracking system friendly. Interestingly enough, when you put your contact information in a header, some ATS systems can't read that header, so they never have your contact information, which your resume is the most common thing that's given to the hiring manager. Your application typically stays back with HR. So that hiring manager has no way to contact you. They'd have to go back to HR to ask for your contact information. And when they have 300 applicants, even if they like you, they'd have to really like you to want to do that. So these are just things to keep in mind. If you have questions about how your resume might work with an applicant tracking system, again, reach out to Career Services. We're here to help. We can talk with you through those things, give you some tips. There's some resources on our website, and honestly, Google. There's a lot of great resources out there about what ATS systems do. How do you know if you're applying through an ATS system? When you go to the careers page, if it starts with like something like Workday or Brass Ring or Talio or Oracle or Silk Road, those are all applicant tracking systems and HR software. So the likelihood of someone using that is high. Another thing is keep it short. So there's different styles of resume, which I'll talk about in a minute, but general rule of thumb for most resumes is it should be about a page. There are some special circumstances where that isn't the case, but generally it's 1 page for every degree or 10 years of work experience. So if that gives you an idea though, your resume can go back 10 years. If you're a college freshman, you're not necessarily going to go all the way back to when you're in elementary school, right? But you actually can include high school information on a resume going off to an employer. It just isn't necessarily your high school information, like where you graduated. But again, that golf club example, that puts down a resume. And I know many of you in this course are looking for technical work in the future. And just because, keep in mind, just because it's not technical or not a skill you need for that job does not mean it's not relevant to an employer, like we just met, which I was talking about earlier. So what can you include? Yes, your education. And that really should look like Bachelor of Science in Electrical and Computer Engineering, Bachelor of Arts in Computer Science. It really should be your degree title, and you don't need to put anything in front of it like sophomore pursuing a BA in computer science. No, just say BA in computer science. If you are interested in a technical profession, so a lot of the STEM fields, it's good to include your technical skills. And that's going to be true a lot in artistic fields too that intersect multimedia. So anything that would be using like Adobe InDesign, special lighting programs and editing programs, software. A lot of times they want to know those technical skills. Any relevant experience, so volunteer clubs, projects, class assignments, anything where you've shown up in a space doing something you've enjoyed. Remember, that should go on there. Honors and awards can go on there. To me, it's usually a little bit less of an important section because it takes up a lot of room without saying a ton about you. But like if you got first place in your freshman design project, I would put that on there. If not in a separate honors and awards section, put it in your project section where you have that project listed. If you were involved in speech and debate, again, when you're in high school, you were in your high school forensics team, which is speech and debate, and you won state, you can put that on your resume. So it doesn't always have to be in a separate section. You can intertwine it in your experiences. What not to include. So you don't need your high school under education. That's not necessary. Your high school academics are basically trumped by your college experience. Your college academics are harder, so you don't need that information in there. But again, your high school experience can stay in other places if you're talking about why it is relevant to an employer. And the list goes on of all the things I have had students get jobs for from high school. And a lot of professionals will say, as long as it's relevant, I want to see those things from high school. That's usually how our students get their first internships or potentially their first job, because they might have had an experience from high school. But the academics generally are not relevant. Although some folks like to see if you were part of an IB program, they like to see that, or like you were part of, you did a study abroad through high school, or you were in a boarding school that has like a reputation. There's certain caveats to that, but in general, you don't need to put that you went to like legacy high school on your resume. You really don't actually need a hobbies or interests section, although again, all of these things could potentially go on there. Your hobbies should be reflected elsewhere, or could be reflected elsewhere, but that is an okay thing to have on there still. So to be, and a good example of this is to be an astronaut, you need to be scuba certified. So every year I do a presentation with, for the physics department with a PhD, a pretty high up manager at Ball Aerospace. She got her PhD believe she got a PhD from CU, if not was her undergrad. And she has scuba diving on her resume because, and if she saw that on her resume, she resonates with it. So those are examples of those kind of tidbits you can include. You don't need a picture though. In fact, in the US, it's generally frowned upon because we have something called equal employment opportunity law, and that is something to protect you as a worker to avoid discrimination. And so if a recruiter sees a picture, they can feel uncomfortable. Again, that being said, there are design resumes that might have that component on there. So that's usually more where you might be like modeling or might be part of the aesthetic. So I don't necessarily see it as like, so theater, dance, a lot of those folks, performing arts will have a picture. Not again so much in the technical fields, but if you have a creative based resume, again, if you're in like the TAM program, some of those students do have their picture on their resume because they're into mixed modalities and different types of integrating digital and creative media. So, and then you might wonder why I have ISMA on the screen here. So I always like to include this as an example. ISMA is from one of the best, in my opinion, Disney movies, Emperor's New Groove. And there is a scene in the movie where her sidekick, Crunk, they're looking for a llama. If you've watched, and if you haven't watched, I highly recommend. So Crunk is trying to find this llama that is actually the Emperor, spoiler alert, and they're scavenging the jungle looking for the llama. They stop and see a squirrel, and Crunk starts talking to the squirrel. And the Isma looks at him enraged and says, "Why did you not tell me you speak squirrel?" And Crunk goes, "It wasn't relevant." And it was relevant. Clearly he was talking to a squirrel to get a sense of where the llama went, to get where they needed to go, to find the thing they were looking for and get their solution, solve their problem. So there are things that you might have in your life that you feel are not relevant, that you could still share with an employer. So I always say, don't be like Crunk. Don't fail to explain how an experience is relevant, and don't leave something out that is relevant. But again, thinking about your measuring stick, if it is something you hate doing, you don't need to put it on there. So maybe you hate using Excel. Again, you're probably going to have to use it, but don't play up your Excel experience. Employers read that story to help determine where you might want to go. So if you really talk about it in depth on your resume, they're going to look to that. So you get to control the information here. So include things that you enjoy doing and spin them in a way that feel relevant to an employer. So now let's get into resume formatting. How do we put this together? You've brainstormed, you've thought of some things that should go on there. And I would encourage you, if you don't have a resume at all, I would pause right now and start writing out things that you like to do, relevant skills that you enjoy using, projects you've worked on in your classes. I would just go ahead and start free writing a list or writing one up on your computer and pause, because this is a great time to start brainstorming. But say you have that list, say you already have a resume that you're working with, the best structure for it is something called the PAR technique. And the PAR technique, it stands for problem, action, result. And so it's a very action-oriented bullet. So basically you'll write your project header. So for this, you created a motorized bike or a drill-powered bike. So what was the problem that you were tasked with? This person was tasked with the problem of creating a bike using old parts that they could refurbish. Then the actions, what actions did they take, and what was the final result? This might be all in one bullet. It might be spread over a series of bullets, but it's putting all of that information in there. You might not start in that order, and the reason why is because you always want to start with an action verb. It helps us envision you actively doing the work. So you might not start in a PAR structure, but you want to make sure each job description, each entry on your resume addresses the problem, the action, and the result. The why. Why was it important? You might be thinking, I say that a lot. The reason why, if you've ever met with me, I've told you this, probably, is because every job exists in the world to solve a problem. And when needs change, like some of the things going on right now with the current COVID-19 situation, when that happens, our economic trends will change, our economy will change, different jobs will change. So thinking of like grocery stores and King Supers, Instacart, Amazon, the post office, they need more workers than they've ever needed before because they need more workers to ensure a clean work environment, to ensure the volume of customers they're experiencing are treated quickly, efficiently, and safely, to maybe put out new processes and procedures. So they are hiring at high volumes right now. But other aspects like our restaurants, right, are experiencing layoffs because right now they don't have people coming in their doors. So every job exists in the world to solve a problem. So when you worked on this project, you did this job, you volunteered for this organization, you did it because you saw a problem that needed to be fixed, or in the case of a project or assignment, there was a problem that you needed to learn how to do. So what is the problem? How did you go about accomplishing it? And what was the end result? And maybe your end result was it crashed and burned, it was awful. You could still potentially put that on your resume and talk about what you learned from it. Again, using the framework of if you enjoyed it or not. If it crashed and burned and you hated it, you don't necessarily need to keep that on your resume. You can, but it doesn't have to go on there. So if you've gathered nothing from me so far, it's that there's no one right way to write a resume. It needs to best suit your needs. And something to keep in mind, if you're ever writing the resume for like an assignment like this, or if you're ever writing it for a specific employer, do the best you can to research what they're looking for so you can follow the rules that they're looking for. So like if it's for an assignment, follow the needs of your assignment. If it's for a company, can you see how that team likes to look at resumes? Do they really value an objective statement? Do they really value work projects? Do they really value extracurriculars? So get to know, that's where networking really comes in. And that's why it's so helpful and effective to get our foot in the door with a company, because it actually helps us write our resume more effectively and tell our story more effectively. All right, so say you've got all this figured out, you've got your problem, action, result, you've got that all brainstormed. The actual formula for putting this on your resume is action verb plus task, again, plus that result. So you start with an action verb: designed, developed, created. The task: designed, motorized bike using refurbished parts. Result: to complete an obstacle course. What is that? So you put it all together. I like to share here some different types of resumes. So everything I've mostly been talking about today focuses in on an industry-based resume. So something to keep in mind, there are other types of resumes. And how should you know which one you should use? Well, that's a great question. And that, again, is where we can come alongside you and assist you, but also knowing your audience, doing some networking can help. Creative resumes are really common in design-based fields. So that could be computer science on like a front end, or web design, app design, game design side. It could be in mechanical engineering or aerospace, where you're really focused again on a design-based firm. So maybe you want to work in product design. You might have a creative-based resume. It could happen obviously for our photographers, or so the folks in the TAM programs often will have a creative-based design. A lot of our students in the CMCI, College of Media, will have a creative-based resume. So there's no right or wrong. This is where it helps to know your audience, know where you're applying to. Lockheed Martin, if you sent them a creative resume, they might be kind of scratch their heads, and it might not go through their applicant tracking system. So it's good to know your audience. A federal resume is an entirely different ballgame, and you will use this when you apply to anything on usajobs.gov. And it is very different. It actually might be 4 to 5 pages long, because it is every job you have ever worked in a certain time frame. It's your contact information of your supervisor there, your salary, if you were paid, your class projects, relevant coursework you have taken. It's a lot more exhaustive because they use that to determine your pay level. and your qualifications, because every resume is actually read by a person. And so they read it very literal. So instead of using an applicant tracking system to catch the keywords, they read your resume and they match it up with the job description, and they have to match. They cannot assume you have that experience. So usually I recommend for someone trying to write a federal resume is go to usajobs.gov, read through a job there, use their resume. They actually have a resume template, a resume maker, and then come in, we can talk through it together. We have a lot of guides and resources around helping students write federal resumes. So how will you know if you need one? Is, again, typically if you want to work with like the USDA, US Forest Service, military. So if you're applying to like a Lockheed Martin, which might be using defense spending money, you won't need a federal resume. But if you're applying to work for like the DoD and the CIA, they need a lot of engineers. They're actually hiring right now. They need a lot of STEM professionals and business and engineering. You would need a federal resume for them. And then a CV is if you're looking in academia. That's pretty much the only place you'll use a CV, and it stands for curriculum vitae. It is not interchangeable with resume, but we do treat it like that in the US. So it is a separate type of document, and it is also can be very lengthy. In fact, many of your professors' CVs are potentially 30+ pages long because of the formatting, not necessarily because they have written that much, but it's every publication. It is their research interests. It is their research projects. So it can get to be very lengthy. On the left-hand side, you'll just see different categories that can go on a resume. We've already talked about most of those, so I'm not going to touch on them again, but this is an example of the structure it can go in. Again, it is always good to show, not tell. So this goes with the explaining the why. I'd like to give an example of what this looks like. So for example, instead of saying, I have a good ability to work on a team, no, you can say something more of like, member of varsity soccer team since sophomore year. That tells me more of scope. You can say something like 2 years of volunteer work helping crime victims understand their rights. Again, I'm going to understand a little bit more about your interpersonal skills. But potentially the best bullet on here is this excellent oral communication skills. If you'll look here, it's very, very specific. So welcome 600 students and their parents. So I'm getting a really strong sense of you can present to peers and parents. 600 is a really big number to present to. And the new student orientation means that I'm entrusting you to present to my potential consumer, right? My client for higher ed, our new students who are coming to campus are our new clients. So that can translate to business if you're talking about that. That can translate to industry. So you always want to try to use the value add and in numbers. Can you quantify your experiences? And keep in mind, that doesn't mean they're looking for someone to present, like, had a budget of $1 million. When you're 16 years old, a budget of $200 is a lot of money too. And a lot of times with the projects you work on in classes, it's looking at what you're doing with less. So if you have a very small budget, how are you repurposing? How are you resourcing? So it's not always about a large number. Often it can be just about a small number as well. So I just want to share this because we survey employers. Well, the National Association of Colleges and Employers surveys employers every year. Most of those employers are large STEM companies. So like Boeing is part of it, GE, I think Hyundai, Toyota, Lockheed, Audi, Cisco. So lots of big employers. And they release the data every year. And then in February, so I'm just starting to work through this data for this coming year. So or for 2019. So what this is saying is every year they survey employers and ask, what are the proficiencies you are looking for in your new hires? So like what they need, what they have to get versus how proficient are the new hires they are getting. So if you look down here, the deep blue, like the deep teal is considered essential. They really, really need these skills. And the lighter kind of neon blue is how proficient people came in as talking about those, how much they evidenced having them. So what we'll see over here is that every employer thinks their starting talent has the digital technology skills that they need. So they know the languages they need to know. They have the skill sets they need to have around a technology and skills base. But where they do have a gap are things like leadership. teamwork, problem solving. Look at this gap in problem solving. That's a big gap. That's almost a 50-point gap. Communication skills, work ethic. These are all things you have through the activities you have done. I've never met with someone who's never had something where they can talk about this. Again, whether it's caring for an elderly relative who is sick, selling baked goods to raise money to buy, whatever, buy a car, whatever it is that you want. Whether it is, again, swimming, tennis, coaching, cheerleading, all of the sports, all of these spaces. Scouting is a huge one. Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts of America. These are adventure crew. These are great places where you get these skills. So that's why those pieces are actually relevant to an employer, because it helps highlight them. So I want to just show you some examples. These are hard to read, so it's not necessarily about content. I want to just kind of show you how it looks when it's all put together. So this person put it in a column format. So he's got his headers here, and then he's got his content on this side, and that is totally fine. It is a little dense, but that's okay. But you can see he has relevant experience as a header. He's got projects. He's got his leadership experience, additional experience. You'll see there's no one way. You have to highlight and title these. What I will point out is if you look at this, his activities and honors took up a whole inch on his resume when you have a very small space. So he could potentially, Manny could potentially pull out his involvement, his activities separately, and either eliminate the honors or somehow do this section differently. So those are things he could do, but it does also work this way. Here's a creative-based resume. So you can see this person, similar information, but a very creative way. So we call this traditional or industry-based. This is a creative. And this is a person who is a mechanical engineer. So again, it doesn't necessarily have to just be in computer science or design. Different fields will use creative resumes. A lot of students who create creative resumes use LaTeX. They might use or InDesign or a publisher, one of those softwares. So lastly, this is kind of one of the templates we put out. You don't ever really want to follow a pure template because you do want your resume to look different, but this is just the kind of a guide we put together for career services. And then here are some really creative resumes. So these are more common in design-based spaces, like I said. So here on the left is a graphic designer. This one I usually like to share as maybe a strategy of what not to do. If you see this person has a ton of white space left, that all of the color can be make it a little hard to read. And it can be hard to read the font because of the white text on the red. So this one isn't maybe the best, but there are some cases that are really kind of fun that stand out here. So it's also still not actually bad. This person uses a lot better use of their white page or their full page, but again, some of it can be dense. So you always want to print out your resume and look at it in different formats to make sure it's easy to read. But this person definitely makes more use of their space. They've got their graphic design experience and kind of their creativity, but it's still very, very easy to read. So last thing I want to talk about when it comes to content and putting it all together, a lot of students will say, well, again, how do I know what to include, what I don't include, what makes the most sense? Or I'm having a really hard time writing my resume. I don't know what to say. Here's a little handy cheat sheet that I recommend. Go on Google and find any sort of free word cloud generator. There are a lot of them. And take some job descriptions that look interesting to you, and they don't have to be ones you're qualified for now. They could be down the road, future-oriented ones, and put them in a word cloud generator. Words that are more often repeated are going to be larger. So here's an example of one for environmental engineering. So you can see the words that are the biggest are environmental, engineering, construction, skills, design, civil, project. So you can see these words that are bigger, skills, design. Those bigger words are used more often. So should these appear in your resume? Yeah. This is just some more data from NACE. I like to include this to, again, illustrate what can be relevant, but also just to help show a lot of students feel like, well, I have to have that internship. That's the only thing that is going to help me set myself apart. And actually, no, that is a piece, right? That is the strongest correlation. So it's looking at a 5-point scale where 1 has no relevance and 5 has extreme relevance. It's from that same survey I was looking at earlier from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. The most relevant pieces are some sort of industry experience, whether that's an internship or that's volunteerism, but something is some sort of experience in industry. The next major one is major. So your college degree plays a huge factor. But then right after that is leadership, less than 1 point differential. Involvement in clubs. So you'll see all of these different factors. And this is where I actually will comment often on students' resumes is I'll work with someone who maybe worked at Starbucks for 3 years or King Soopers, and they'll say, that's not relevant. I don't want to know my resume. In some ways, not having any work or volunteer experience can work against you. So any work experience. My first job was working at, I'm from Arizona, so our King Soopers is fries. I was a grocery store clerk at Fry's. It helped me get my next job because it basically shows that you've been a valuable team member. You've been reliable and you've showed up. So that's where you want, it doesn't matter where it is, but having previous work experience across any industry can actually be very helpful. And most employers look to service-based industries because it's hard work. So it can go on there. And if you're watching this and you have no work experience, that's also okay because again, think about the other things you have done. It is likely you have volunteered, been involved in a church, in scouting, in your high school or in your college, in your academics, you've done projects. So again, if you're starting to feel like, hey, maybe I don't have things put on here, come meet with us. We will talk about that. We will help you tell your story. That's what we do here. So that wraps up all my pieces around cover letters, around resumes. And now I want to transition over to cover letters. So cover letters, like I mentioned, should be customized for every position you apply to. And it's a persuasive essay. So you want to follow the rules of a persuasive essay, which essentially are, I really encourage you avoid using passive voice that distance you from your action, which weakens your argument. And we all speak in passive voice. It's a very common way to speak in terms of how we just don't like chat with each other, but you do want to avoid it in your cover letter. Other than that, besides your right, and I think that's why it's great that this is often part of class assignments because it's helping you understand how your writing style does apply to a cover letter because it's the employer's first representation of your written and communication skills. So like for me, when I hire, the first place I look is a cover letter. Since I hire predominantly students, I don't expect them to have a lot of experience, but I want to look at their passion. Are they interested in the work I do? So a cover letter helps them tell that story to me. So your first paragraph essentially is why you're contacting this person. So it is hard to write a hypothetical cover letter, but just pretend that you're writing it to a real person if you're writing a hypothetical one, or better yet, use it to apply for a real position. So why I'm contacting you, it's good to make a reference to the position number, the title, location. That way, if it gets separated from your resume, they know where they go. It's also the place to name drop. So maybe you heard about this position through a career fair, through your mom's neighbor, through your best friend's dad, whatever it might be. It's usually kind of a loose connection. You can mention that. So you can say, dear hiring manager, I'm applying for the position of mechanical engineering intern 1, position ID number, at Lockheed Martin this summer. I learned about the position through Jose Gonzalez, a current systems engineer at the Littleton campus. He mentioned that it's a great place to work and he really loves the team dynamic. And it inspired me through all the work he is doing that I want to be part of the same mission. Something like that. And then you give them a thesis statement. I think I'm a great fit for this position because of X, Y, Z thing that you're going to then back up with the rest of your resume. So some sort of thesis statement. And then your body paragraphs, this might be 1 paragraph. It shouldn't be more than 2 or 3. Your whole cover letter really needs to stick to 1 page and typically isn't more than 5 paragraphs. So your body paragraphs essentially are what you get by hiring me. So by hiring me, you get someone who is. That could be how you start writing it. And then you can make it a little more formal. So start from that passionate place. This is what I love. This is why I'm a good fit. This is the skills I want to use and how I'm going to bring them to your company in a beneficial way. So focus on the employer and how you're going to bring your best self to them. And it's okay if, they're expecting you to be green. That's the whole point of an intern. They're looking for someone who is they can mentor, who is malleable, someone they can train and teach. An internship is a win-win for both of you. For a full-time entry-level position, again, they know there's a steep learning curve. They know you'll be green. They're looking at it for the long term. They're in it for the long game, right? The best thing you can do here is use those words that are in the job description. So in the job ad, look at those words and write to them. Easiest way to write a cover letter truthfully, grab all those things in desired qualifications, preferred qualifications, put both of those sections in a blank Word document, write how you meet them, then remove those and make a cohesive paper out of it, right? So that way you're directly writing to those experiences that they're looking for. Easily enough, your final paragraph is, thank you. I appreciate you reading over my resume and cover letter. I appreciate your time. And basically a request for an interview. I look forward to the opportunity to meeting with you in person, and I can be reached at. It's good to include your contact information here because you want to make it as easy as possible for that employer. Most hiring managers have no time to do hiring. It is not part of their job, right? That's why they have a recruitment team, but they have final say typically. So they have, when it's gotten to the hiring manager, they're doing this on top of the rest of their day job, and they're likely shorthanded because that's why they're bringing someone in. So you want to make it as easy as possible for them. Give them your information right there. That way when they finish reading, if they're interested, they'll pick up the phone. So with that, I'd just like to conclude the ProReady Initiative. ProReady Initiative is part of the College of Engineering. This is an initiative to make sure that every student has the opportunity to chart their career paths, to do some career exploration, gain relevant experience through an experiential learning process, whether that's research or industry internships, and grow their professional network. So all of our events, all of our STEM-related content, employer visits, webinars, whatever it might be, they can all be found at this website right here, in addition to Handshake. So Handshake has all of it. This is really where it's focusing in on the College of Engineering. So, and the nice part is Handshake is just through career services, whereas ProReady is across the entire campus. So it's a really great resource. So do check it out. And with that, I'll go ahead and leave it on this slide. Here again is our contact information and instruction on how to access our resources. So we are doing drop-in hours virtually, 12 p.m. through 4 p.m., Monday through Friday, through May 8th, so through the end of semester. We still have appointments going on. Right now they're all virtual. They will go back to being on campus when we're all back on campus again, but we are actually open year-round. So you can make an appointment in the summer. You can make an appointment during, the only times we are closed are university holidays. So you can always reach out. And if you are not in the US or not in Denver, Boulder, when we are back open, like if you're studying abroad or anything like that, we actually always offer virtual appointments for our students who might not be in the Denver, Boulder area when we do have in-person appointments. So keep that in mind. You can always request that as well. So with that, I thank you for having me, and I look forward to hopefully getting to know some of you via appointments or email in the future. Have a great day.